Makahanya haramita shingyo Genji Zaiboza Gyojin Hanya haramita Jishoken Gon Gai Gudo Isai Gu Yaku Shari Shiki Fui Gu Fui.
Records of the Transmission of the Lamp. Book 8. Chan Master Fenzhou Wuye. Chan Master Wuye, who lived from 762 to 823, of Fenzhou, was a native of Shaanxi, whose family name was Shi. At first, his mother, of the Li family, heard a voice in the air saying, "Sending a recluse, okay?" After which she felt pregnant. The evening before the birth, a spiritual light filled the room. When still very young, the boy would walk looking straight ahead, and while sitting would cross his legs. At the age of 9, under the guidance of Chan Master Zhiben of the Kaiyuan monastery, he received instruction in the Mahayana Sutras. Reading 5 lines, he could recite them without mistake. At 12, he had his head shaved, and at the age of 20 received the full precepts at the hands of Vinaya Master Yu of Hubei. When studying the commentaries on the 4 divisions of the Vinaya regulations, just going through to the end was enough to be able to explain them. For the sake of all the monks, he discoursed the summer and winter without break on the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. So today we're looking at another example of the lives of the Chan masters of China, as contained in the great Zen classic, or Chan Zen classic, The Records of the Transmission of the Lamp. This book is a collection of the patriarchs going right the way from the Buddhas, 7 Buddhas before Shakyamuni, through to the first patriarch, Mahakasyapa, then Ananda, and then all the way through the Indian patriarchs to Bodhidharma, and from Bodhidharma up until around about the 11th century. And it contains not only the traditional life stories, the works and words of the Zen masters, but it also contains many of the koan cases that came to be used in the training of Chan or Zen monks. So today we're looking at an excerpt from the life of Master Wuye, which is his Chinese name, Japanese name Funshu Mugo. And we start with a very typical motif, which those of you who are familiar with these stories and have perhaps listened to a few of these talks as well will recognize. We have a miraculous birth, which always seems to accompany those of great prestige. If we remember, the Buddha himself, of course, was preceded by a dream that his mother, Queen Maya, had of a regal royal elephant, white elephant, which in the dream entered her left side. And then 9 months later, the Prince Gautama, Prince Siddhartha, was born, emerging from her right side, not in the usual way, but in this miraculous way. And we talked about this as being a motif of spiritual birth, and this is reinforced by a voice from the air, a sort of bodiless voice, quite casually saying, "Sending a recluse, okay?" The recluse, of course, being the monk, obviously being Master Wuye. And when we see this, we shouldn't regard it as something to be believed literally. I mean, I have no idea whether or not she heard a voice. Maybe she did, who knows? But it's very much coding a belief there, very much coding a teaching that we don't come into this world as blank slates. And of course, this is something that's recognized in Buddhism with this idea of karmic inheritance and stores of merit and so on. Of course, in Buddhism, we have rebirth. We don't have reincarnation because the Buddha taught no I. So there cannot be a self that is reborn from life to life, an individual. What we have are accumulated causes and conditions of the past which are reborn into the present. And it very much echoes nature. And we can see where such a belief can arise, because if we look, we see the seasons pass. Here we are at the time of this talk, we happen to be in summer. And last year we had a summer. It's a rather wet and cool summer this year. Last year it was hotter, but still the trees were green and the grass was greying and the roses were in the garden. Some pink, some white, some yellow. The bushes are a little bit taller. So in some ways they repeat, but in other ways they are also slightly different as well. And this is what we see. We know it's the same rose bush, but we also know it's not quite the same. The leaves aren't the same, the flowers aren't the same, the seeds aren't the same, although they look so. And yet quite clearly they haven't sprung out of nothing. They've come from a collection of causes and conditions that arose out of the past, and the life that they're living now, the fact that they're being pollinated, the fact that in a month or two the flowers will fall and the seeds will begin to grow. Those seeds will then become the future imperative, the future potential. And this is how it's also seen. We have our individual lives, which come to be and cease to be. But running in and through all that, there is this sense of a process that is evolving, a process that is being undergone. And this is very much the sense in that wheel of life, with that coming to be and ceasing to be, coming to be and ceasing to be. And of course, the quality of those seeds can be greater or it can be lesser. They're all part of a seed mix, but occasionally something exceptional is thrown up, and this is where we have Buddhas and sages. And so, quite rightly, this is heralded with certain portents and signs in these stories. A voice from heaven, a great light, a dream, and so on. It echoes a future potential. Something that can happen. And we shouldn't just think, therefore, we shouldn't be despondent by this if our own birth wasn't heralded by angels blowing trumpets. The fact is that, Buddhistically speaking, all of us have a fortunate birth because we are in human form, and the Buddha said that only from the human form is liberation possible. So that in itself is significant, that in itself is auspicious. And our practice, our Buddhist practice, our spiritual practice, is developing the lineage of which we are part. And this is the whole thing when we read the transmissions of the lamp. We shouldn't think of these beings as being either separate individuals, although obviously in one way they are. They're also an interlocking unit. And because we are reading these lives, because we are participating in them, even just reading them, we are also affecting consciousness. We are also laying down seeds for the future. If we then put the practice into practice, if we then put the teachings into practice, then we accelerate the process. And this is what Buddhism is. It says in one of the sutras that the heart naturally inclines towards nirvana, leans towards nirvana, slides towards nirvana. And that process can be speeded up, and it can be slowed down and even halted for a while. But sooner or later, that inherent imperative to Buddhahood, to enlightenment, which is what the Buddha's teachings in the Mahayana is based upon, inevitably has to take over. It's a force of nature, and we are part of that, of course. We have our part to play. So, that evening, before the birth, a spiritual light filled the room. This connection with light, with sagacity, with the holiness, with something exceptional, with consciousness, because of course light illuminates. I mean, after all, the book itself is called Records of the Transmission of the Lamp, and it comes from a parable that the Buddha told when he said that he likened himself to a lamp, and he said that this lamp, like any lamp, if you imagine an oil lamp, can light 1,000 other lamps, and yet its own light is not diminished at all in one iota. And this is how the Buddha teaches. He can teach the Dharma, he can give the Dharma, yet nothing is actually lost from him. And in one sense, nothing is gained either by the hearers, and yet that light spreads. That light moves out, ripples out, and becomes greater, despite the fact that the original light is not diminished at all. So a spiritual light is really of that sort. That light, when it comes into contact, of burning light, not thinking of an electric light, but a burning light, a flame, when it comes in contact with something that is like, then it can ignite it too. And that, of course, is how the Dharma works. The Dharma works because it is heard and it resonates. It's not just a case of going out and forcing beliefs down other people's throats. This is why Buddhism is not. It's a missionary religion in as much that it has a mission to make itself available, but it doesn't proselytize. It doesn't exert undue pressure. Because it doesn't suit everybody. If the inner disposition is not there, then the outer form will not fit. It will be quite literally like putting a round peg in a square hole, or trying to. You cannot do it. And if you really try to, then damage is caused both to the peg and to the hole, of course. But when that square peg finds the square hole that fits just right, then it's said that Dharma and Karma come together, and this is where the affinity links come in, which appear a little bit later in this particular excerpt. And of course that spiritual light as well illuminates, and of course this is what the Dharma does. It illuminates. It highlights the problem. For example, when the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, he laid bare our human situation, that our lives are filled with light and dark, joy and sorrow, pain and suffering, but also happiness too. And this is how life is. But because we are attached to things, attached particularly to my likes and my dislikes, if I get lumbered with things that I don't like, or separated from things that I like, then I become distressed and unhappy. And the Buddha diagnosed this as our condition. And then he taught the Noble Eightfold Path, which was a way out of this. So this is why the Buddha's teachings themselves are likened to an illumination, because they show our situation. If we are constantly making our own destiny, karmically speaking, and yet we do so blindly, then we can get ourselves as much into trouble as we can getting ourselves out of trouble. It's done blindly, and so being aware of what we are doing, when the Buddha's teachings highlight our foibles, then we can rejoice, because now we know how to avoid them, like the hole in the road. When still very young, the boy would walk looking straight ahead, and while sitting would cross his legs. And this is the deportment of a monk, someone who's actually in the training. If you see Zen monks and Zen nuns, and when I use the term monk, it can refer to both men and women, you will see that their deportment is very strict, the way they hold themselves. They do not just sort of flop down in chairs or sort of lean up against walls and things. They have to hold to a very strict form, and this strict form is a good form of physical training, because it helps really to become embodied. It helps us to remain very much in the body and not to. It's much more difficult to drift off or to be overtaken by the fires, by the passions, if we are holding to good form. We can try that ourselves. It's a useful experiment. It's just for a day, just a little bit, holding ourselves together a little bit more than usual. Instead of putting our feet up on chairs or whatever, just hold to, just with that slightly more collected form, and see just how much more at home in the body we become. Don't even have to try. The body itself takes care of it. And of course, sitting, he would cross his legs, because this would be the natural. Monks sit a lot of meditation, so naturally he would be used to crossing his legs. At the age of 9, under the guidance of Chan Master Jiben of the Kaiyuan monastery, he received instructions in the Mahayana Sutras. So, much perhaps to the surprise of some, those in the Chan and Zen school do study the sutras. Even Bodhidharma certainly said a special transmission outside the teachings not dependent on words and phrases. Yet he didn't say we don't deal with the sutras at all. Quite the contrary. We have to know what we're practicing. It has to have a context. But we cannot rely on our head knowledge, on our book learning, to help us. The sutras themselves show us, point the way, but we ourselves must walk. We ourselves must undertake a practice. Reading 5 lines, he could recite them without mistake. And this, well, reading was something that came quite late. I mean, we're used to it now because most people are literate in this part of the world. But in previous times, as I'm sure we're aware, this was not the case, and most people would learn things off by heart anyway. The use of memory was much more developed in people, and in fact people would learn entire books. That would be quite normal. Of course, there were much fewer books then, but for example, learning a sutra, or in the case of in the West, learning the Bible wasn't so unusual, or certainly learning large chunks of it anyway would be quite the done thing. Interestingly, in Islam, the Quran is written to be recited, and in fact it means the word Quran means to recite, because that is originally how it was formulated. And so it is the same with the Buddhist texts as well. All the sutras start with the phrase "Thus have I heard," because originally they weren't written down, they were orally recited. At 12, he had his head shaved, and at the age of 20 received the full precepts at the hands of Vinaya Master Yu of Hubei. Hubei is a province, and this was quite the normal thing. At 12 he had his head shaved, in other words he had become a monk, and at the age of 20 he received the full precepts. These are the full precepts for monks, which at this stage there would be 10 precepts. There are 5 precepts for lay people, to refrain from harming others, to refrain from stealing, to refrain from sexual misconduct, slanderous and evil speech, and also intoxication. But there are 5 more for monks as well. And of the Vinaya master is the Vinaya refers to the rules of the ordained Sangha, and there are a number of different versions of these. And in fact, this was an area of much debate in both India and in China as to exactly which were the proper Vinaya rules. The different schools had slightly different ones. The Buddha himself gave permission that the rules could change if the circumstances changed, and it was interesting to note that the development of the Vinaya rules wasn't something that took place all in one go. The Buddha didn't sort of produce 250 rules and say, right chaps, this is what you have to do. Those rules were developed in accordance to this, or in response to certain circumstances, and each of the Vinaya rules has a story attached to it as to something that happened to a monk, or that the Buddha would then produce a rule in response to that. And this is very much in keeping with our teaching, because the situation is the master in our circumstances. We don't apply the same rules in all different places. How we behave at home, how we behave in a temple, how we behave at work is always going to be slightly different. I mean, obviously there's good conduct in all the places, and we're expected to adhere to good conduct in all the places, but the way that the rules are applied are not going to be the same. I remember very much in the temple I used to go to, just a very small thing, when we were served tea, the tea was always poured in the cup first, and then the milk would be added afterwards. Of course, outside of that, I was brought up differently. We always put milk in the teacup first, and then poured the tea on top of it. This isn't to say that one is right and one is wrong. It's just that this is how it's done in one place, and then in another place there's a different rule. And the ability of the Zen student is to be able to adapt to those changing circumstances without getting stuck on it. There was one person, in fact, who when he left the temple and went to somebody else's house, then told his host off because his host put the milk in the teacup first. I mean, that's exactly what we shouldn't be doing when it comes to applying the rules. When studying the commentaries on the 4 divisions of the Vinaya regulations, just going through to the end was enough to be able to explain them. For the sake of all the monks, he discoursed the summer and winter without break on the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. And so we can see that obviously what the story is pointing out is his aptitude, that he had a perfectly natural aptitude for the Dharma. He could explain the Vinaya regulations, why they were there, give examples of them, no doubt, as well, and would be able to explain them. And it's interesting because nowadays people are not usually very interested in rules of good conduct. People don't like to be told what to do. But in those days, people were much more interested in that burning question of what is it to be a good human being? What is good human conduct? And it would preoccupy not just Buddhists, but philosophers generally of all the religions. People were really concerned about wanting to live the good life and wanting to be a good human being and being clear as to what that ideal conduct should be. We see it in Taoism, we see it in Confucianism as well, and also in many of the Hindu and Vedanta schools as well. And Buddhism certainly, very much it's there. And this is all part of that discourse on the Vinaya. And he also discoursed on a sutra called the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. And this is a sutra that came through, this is a Mahayana sutra, a sutra that came through to China a little bit later. And its central teaching is what's known as the Tathagata Garbha. That is Tathagata, which is another name for the Buddha, and Garbha means a seed or a womb, and it's the Buddha womb or the Buddha seed. And this teaching is that all beings have the Buddha seed, have the seed of Buddhahood within them. And in fact it goes a little bit more than that. It's because it was from this particular sutra that the Chinese actually developed the conception of the Buddha nature. And in fact it is in this sutra that there's a description of the Buddha's enlightenment, and that his first words after his enlightenment is different to the Pali canon. Slightly different formulation. In the Mahaparinirvana, it says that the Buddha declared upon his awakening how wonderful, how miraculous all beings, but all beings are fully and completely endowed with the wisdom and the power of the Tathagata. But sadly, because of their sticky attachments, human beings are not aware of it. And so the Mahaparinirvana Sutra became closely connected with this central teaching in Mahayana, and this is something that's obviously very strongly at the center of Zen teaching as well, because Zen training is about realizing the Buddha nature, seeing for oneself one's own Buddha nature and the Buddha nature in all living things as well, because that nature is one nature, of course. So a very important a sutra, and obviously something that he could discourse on. But what's clear is that although he could discourse on them, although he had insight into them, his own seeing may not have been quite complete. Later he heard that Patriarch Matsu's teaching was flourishing, and especially went to see him. And Matsu we've seen before, we've had a talk on him, also known as Master Baso Doitsu, and we know that he taught using his famous phrase, "Heart is Buddha." When Matsu regarded his handsome countenance and robust form, his voice as sonorous as a bell, he said, "What a lofty Buddha hall, but no Buddha in it." And so what he refers to is saying that his general form is as a great Buddha hall, and a Buddha hall is where the monks sit meditation, and in that hall obviously there's an altar at one end, and there would be a fine Buddha statue sitting on it. But in this case, Matsu is saying you have the Buddha hall, but there's no Buddha in it. And what he's saying, of course, is that because Buddha, the term Buddha means the one who is awake, what he's saying in a slightly coded form is that this monk before him has not yet awoken to his own Buddha nature. So the master made a prostration and said, "Having studied the three vehicles and poorly understood their purport, I have often heard the Chan schools, 'This heart is Buddha,' but do not really understand it." And this is usually how it goes, that the student or the monk will ask a question of the master, and then the master then has an opportunity to show his own wisdom, his own style, and try to bring the hearer to see clearly. So having made the prostration, which is the usual polite form, he said, "Having studied the three vehicles and poorly understood their purport." The three vehicles, this is a teaching that appears in the Lotus Sutra, where the Buddha discusses a teaching that's known as the Ekayana, that means the one way. And this is really the resolution to a long-standing debate that was held between the various schools of Buddhism about whose was the correct path. Really, it was whether it was the earlier teachings based on the Noble Eightfold Path, or whether it was the Mahayana teachings with its developed teachings, the 6 parameters and the Bodhisattva path. And the Lotus Sutra solved this problem, this division, by saying that actually they were simply stages along the one and the same path. The early teachings were there to set the foundation, and that we undertake those, and then having then, so to speak, clarified a few things, and shed a few of the kleshas, shed a few of the obstructions, that clear seeing, then we could move on to the more developed teachings, which involved the Bodhisattva ideal, to save all sentient beings and to realize Buddhahood for oneself. And the way that the Lotus Sutra explains it is by telling the story of a parable called the parable of the burning house, which I won't go into in great detail, but suffice to say that a rich man has a house, and his children are in the house, and one day the house catches fire and everyone flees, and the father comes back to the house and can't get in because of the fire, and the children are so preoccupied playing with their toys that they are unaware of the danger. And so the father shouts out to them, tells them to come outside, said, "Drop your toys." He says, "I've got much better toys for you out here. In fact, I've got some magnificent carts, 3 magnificent vehicles, one set pulled by deer, one by oxen, and one by great magnificent elephants." And the children are all delighted, drop their toys and run out of the house in order to get their presents, and thus obviously they are saved from the danger. But when they come out, all they actually can see are carts or vehicles being pulled by elephants. And some of the children say, "Well, you said you had 3 types of vehicle, some pulled by deer, some pulled by oxen, and some pulled by elephants, yet you've only got these. And the father says, well, yes, because the ones pulled by elephants are the best, but I know that you all have slightly different wants and slightly different characters, and if I just said that I had ones with elephants, some of you would have come, but some of you would not. So I sort of had to tell you a bit of a white lie, basically. But now you're all here, you can all have the best, and you all have the same. And this is how the Buddha taught that ekayana. He said, so, we have different teachings that will appeal to different characteristics within people at different times. In fact, it's all one teaching, but it just appears to be different in order to cover anybody. So, and therefore it's said that there are 84,000 baskets of teachings, or 84,000 different teachings, in order to appeal to all the different sorts and all the different types, and thus everybody's happy. So this is the purpose of the three vehicles, and this is what the three vehicles are. And in this, then, Wuye is saying that he doesn't quite understand their purpose. And so he's asking instead, I've often heard of the Chan school, this heart is Buddha, but do not really understand it. Doesn't really understand that either. This is the saying of Master Matsu. And the reply comes, it is just the heart that has not yet completely understood. Nothing else, replied Matsu. And good old Master Matsu pointing directly back to it. There he is, the monk in his quandary, thinking that what he really needs to do is to find the answer. Master Matsu says, no, he says, it's the place where the questions and the uncertainty, or the answer and the clarity all arises. That is one's own heart, and that is Buddha, because it's this very heart itself that sees. And this has to do with, and again, we've talked about this at length, so we can go back and listen to some of the other talks. But just to say, of course, that term heart is a translation of the Sanskrit chitta, for which there is no direct translation into English. But it means something akin to seat of consciousness. It's where consciousness takes place, if we put it like that. Sounds, sights, smells, tastes, but also where the place where thoughts arise and are perceived. Because obviously we think and we know we think, and we have feelings and we know we have feelings, and we have concepts and opinions and we know we have these things. But where are they? Where are they experienced? Where is the experiencing? Not the experiencer, but the experiencing. Where is it actually taking place? And no point saying the brain, because the brain is also part of that experience too. Actually, the ideas of the objective world we infer from our subjective experience, from the collective similarity of our experience, but it's always inferred. The primary source of our knowing is this consciousness itself, or this seat of consciousness, the place where it all seems to arise in, and where it all seems to disappear from too. So the fact that the Wuye is not clear, that is his own heart, just in the moment. So in this sense, it's the same when we are sitting zazen, when we're sitting meditation. We often feel that somehow, if only I could get my mind to do this or that or the other. But actually, it's recognizing the functioning of the mind exactly as it is in this moment. That's why we're sitting there, if we want to have a purpose. Hopefully that can fall off too. So it's just the heart that has not yet completely understood, nothing else, replied Matsu. The master asked further, what is the heart seal secretly transmitted by the patriarch coming from the West? Well, this heart seal and the patriarch refers to Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma came from India to China, so he was coming from the West to the East, to China. And he asked, what was the heart seal? In other words, because we talk of a transmission. The book, again, is called the Records of the Transmission of the Lamp. But what is it that's actually transmitted? And in a way, this gets to the real nub of the problem, because I'm convinced that if only you would tell me, then I would understand. If only you could just put it in the right phraseology, then I would get it, and all my problems would be over. So there's always this sense that somehow I haven't got it, and that I need to get it from someone or somewhere outside. And yet, again and again, the masters come and say, rather like Mumon, who used to had a phrase, that a saying, the treasures of the treasures of the house do not come in through the front gate. The treasures referring to the heirlooms, because the heirlooms obviously have been in the house for ages, so of course they don't come in through the front gate. And so it is with us. This house, our own body, is the house, and the treasures were born into the body. They were born with it, and so there's nothing outside, because and the same with mind as well. The same with mind or heart, as it's being used with this chitta. It's already here. Yet I still feel that there's something else. Either I need to get it, or at some point in the future I will get it. Even to want it from the future is still to get it from outside, because the future is outside the present, like the past is outside the present. So harking forwards or harking back is still subtly trying to get away, or perhaps not so subtly, trying to get away from where one's own feet already stand. So this heart seal, secretly transmitted, well, yes, what is transmitted, what isn't? This is something that has to be looked into. The Venerable is really quarrelsome. Go and come back another time, said Matsu. So now he's really using the sword of Manjushri to cut through the bonds, cutting those questions right off, because this is what happens when I'm hungry. I eat, and I'm hungry, and I eat, and then I'm not hungry anymore, but it's there, and I still feel that there's something lacking, so I want another thing and another thing. And it's the same with these questions as well. We get into a complete tizzy with them, I don't understand, so I ask another question. I don't understand, so I ask and really what I'm saying is, feed me, tell me, and so we're told and we don't understand it. Tell me again, and so it's something else said, tell me again. But it's not that the answers being given are insufficient. It's that the eyes that are looking and the ears that are listening are clouded over. They are fixed. They cannot enlarge to take in what is actually being said. So there comes a point when it actually becomes counterproductive. So Matsu cuts him off at this point. Go and come back another time. The master went. So you could imagine him probably turned round rather dejectedly. He'd come all that way, hoping for some enlightenment, hadn't really got it, feeling still confused, no doubt somewhat frustrated, and so he sort of turns and slopes off. And just as he's on his way out, Matsu hailed him, "Venerable!" And the master that is, he then turned round to look. "What is it?" asked Matsu. Now, that's a curious thing, isn't it? Because normally if someone shouts your name, "Hey!" then you turn round and you would be the one that would say, "What is it?" But in this case, Matsu literally takes the words out of his mouth. Looking at him says, "What is it?" And actually that "what is it" has two connotations. One is obviously the usual one, that if somebody shouts your name or shouts over to you, you turn round and say, "Yes, what?" But Matsu isn't saying that. He's saying, "What is it?" At that, the master was awakened. And so it's one of those moments in the stories, isn't it? When suddenly, as it were, it opens up. When that coming together of karma and dharma, when those affinity links are just right between the master and the student, and that chemistry takes place, and that catalyst a saying or some incident just acts as that chemical catalyst that produces the reaction, and suddenly, pow, he's awakened. And with that he then bowed low to Matsu. But Matsu is a wily old master, and he's not going to let anyone get away with anything. "Why is this dullard bowing?" said Matsu. Can't help it, even though he's had his insight. You know, we have to do something. It's called painting horns on the hare or legs on the snake. Both of which, or neither of which, we could say, are really necessary. You don't actually... Snakes don't need legs, and hares don't need horns either. It's a little bit unnecessary. So, yes, even then, even with that awakening, there's still just a little bit further pruning to go. Okay, well, we'll leave that excerpt now for today.